Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are jumping right into a really critical situation. The Qiyam 1404, or Uprising 1404, in Iran.
That's right. And our sources for this are all rooted in some pretty deep political analysis.
So, for you listening, our mission today is really to dissect what makes these protests so different from what we've seen before.
And to do that, we need to understand the fractures inside the Iranian establishment itself. And then there's the whole role of external opposition figures, which gets complicated.
It really does. But let's set the stage first, because the timeline here is, well, it's kind of staggering. The analysis we have points to an incredibly rapid spread.
It's the speed. It all kicks off in the Tehran bazaar.
A hugely important spot economically.
And then within just 2 weeks, maybe 13 days, it had already spread to every single one of Iran's provinces.
Every single one. That alone tells you we're looking at something new here.
Absolutely. And you can only really get the scale of it if you put it next to recent history. We have to look at the last few major uprisings.
Okay, so let's do that. We have 1396, 1398, and 1401. Each one sort of built on the last, right?
Exactly. So back in 1396, the protests were mostly economic. People were angry about inflation, cost of living.
Standard stuff, though obviously very serious.
Right. But then by 1398, the trigger was still economic, a hike in gasoline prices, but something changed. The slogans on the street became way more political.
That's when we started hearing things like death to the dictator.
Precisely. The whole vocabulary of protest shifted. And then, of course, in 1401, you have the Masa Amini movement,
which was so focused on social and political change. And it started, interestingly, on the periphery, in Saqqez, and then moved inward.
And it lasted for about 3 months. But this new uprising, Qiyam 1404, it just flips the script on both of those.
How so?
2 things. First, the starting point. It didn't start on the periphery. It started right in the center, in the Tehran bazaar.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Why is the bazaar so much more critical than, say, just another part of Tehran? What does that signal?
Well, historically, the bazaar is the nerve center of the entire Iranian economy. It's the traditional merchant class, and they have these deep, long-standing ties to the clergy, to the system itself.
So when the bazaar shuts down...
It's not just a protest, it's an economic declaration of war. The state loses its financial lifeblood and, frankly, its economic legitimacy.
That makes perfect sense. And the second big difference?
The direction of the spread. It started in the center and just radiated outward to the provinces, instantly.
The complete opposite of the 1401 movement.
Exactly. And that suggests a level of coordination, a unifying message that just resonated everywhere at once, no matter the local issues.
And that message seems to be defined by just how radical the demands are now. Our sources really hammer this point home, that people are rejecting any idea of, like, bargaining with the system.
They've pushed past it completely. The analysis says the street is done with the whole reformist versus principlist conversation.
The Islatolab versus Osulgara dynamic.
Yeah, that old political game is just, it's irrelevant now. People on the street are demanding total systemic change.
And that intensity, it feels like more than just anger. It's a different kind of determination. One source brought up Adamson's theory of change to explain it.
It's a really useful framework. It describes a movement in 4 stages, or 4 rooms.
Okay.
Room 1 is the status quo. That's where most people live. The movement starts when a small group, maybe 3%, moves into room 2, which is planning.
They organize, they strategize.
Right. But the real test is getting from room 2 to room 3.
That's room 3.
Room 3 is the hard stage of sacrifice and determination. This is where it gets real. You're facing violence, you're risking your job, maybe your life. A lot of people turn back.
But the ones who stay?
The ones who stay are the ones willing to make any sacrifice for the goal. They are completely committed.
So where does the analysis place the Qiyam 1404 movement right now?
Squarely in room 3. That's why the demands are so radical. That's why there's no compromising. The people on the streets now are the ones who have accepted the cost and they're willing to pay it.
And that explains why the regime is in such a panic.
It does, because the option for some kind of gradual, peaceful reform, that's just not on the table for the people anymore.
So if the people are in room 3, calling the regime's bluff, what's happening inside the regime itself? Our sources suggest it's incredibly vulnerable right now.
The analysis is pretty blunt. It says the supreme leader, Khamenei, is at his weakest point ever.
Wow. What's the evidence for that?
Well, there are deep conflicts inside the ruling factions. They can't agree on how to handle this. But one major external blow mentioned is the reported defeat or disarmament of Hezbollah.
How does that affect the domestic situation?
For years, the regime's deal with the public was basically, look, we might not give you economic stability, but we guarantee security.
The security card.
Exactly. If their biggest external security project is failing, it completely shatters that bargain. It undermines the one thing they had left.
And you can see that internal conflict in their messaging. The source pointed to factions, like the one supporting Pezeshkian, trying to split hairs between legitimate protest and rioting.
Yes, they're scrambling. They're trying to say, okay, we hear some legitimate grievances, but they want to label anything that demands real change as atashash, as rioting.
But wait, if the public is already in room 3, why even bother with that game? Doesn't trying to draw that line just show how little control they actually have?
It shows it profoundly. It shows they're split. One faction is trying to create a little political space to save themselves, maybe by acknowledging some problems and sacrificing the old guard.
But the protesters don't care about that.
They have zero interest in partial concessions, so it's just a sign of catastrophic weakness.
Okay, let's shift to the international view. How is the world reacting to this weakness? The sources were pretty critical of Europe's response.
Very cautious is the term used. For countries like Sweden, Norway, the Baltic states, their #1 priority right now is regional security, and that means Ukraine and Russia.
So they're worried that taking a strong stance on Iran could upset some delicate geopolitical balancing act.
That's exactly the critique. They don't want to risk anything that could complicate the situation with Russia. Everything is seen through that lens.
So even a strong condemnation from, say, a Swedish official.
The source suggests it's probably more for domestic consumption, for the diaspora and voters at home, rather than a sign of a real policy change.
But the U.S. stance is described as a contrast to that.
Yes. The analysis notes that figures like Trump and Rubio have had a serious reaction. But, and this is the most important part, we have to be clear about the cause and effect here. The analysts insist that foreign powers only sharpen their teeth after the people on the ground have already stripped the regime of its legitimacy.
So the U.S. reaction is influential because the movement is already so strong.
Exactly. The international community is following the lead of the people in the streets, not the other way around.
The U.S. reaction is a symptom of the movement's success, not the cause of it. That's a powerful distinction.
It is.
Okay, now let's get to the really controversial part of the analysis. The alleged attempts to derail the movement from the outside. The source material points a finger at Reza Pahlavi, or RP.
It does. The accusation is that elements, maybe even within the regime, are trying to use him as a kind of puppet to split the opposition, a bit like what happened in 1979.
And the criticisms of him and his media supporters are, well, they're short.
They're very specific. The analysis paints him as opportunistic, constantly changing his message, and giving calls to action that are just completely disconnected from reality.
Like telling people to shout slogans from your homes.
Exactly. And then there are the accusations of straight-up media manipulation, with Iran International being singled out for promoting him so heavily.
The source mentioned that Fake Hill magazine story, claiming he was ready for a transition.
Right. And the messaging gets almost absurd, like quotes where he promises to return for the final battle, but only if conditions are met. It's all very vague, very passive.
But the most shocking part, I think, are the instructions that were apparently circulated by his supporters, the Guard of Javadan accounts.
Yes, the source cited 2 instructions that are pretty incredible. First, Instruction 99. It tells small groups, like 10 people, to go into a protest, shout royalist slogans, Javed Shah, and have 2 people filming it.
The goal being to create footage that makes their support look much bigger than it is.
Precisely. To create the appearance of a broad royalist movement.
And then there was Instruction 101. This one is just staggering.
It's hard to believe. It allegedly advised followers to get on social media and message figures like Trump and Netanyahu, asking them to bomb Iran immediately.
To bomb their own country. What was the justification for that?
I mean, it's just wild. The stated logic was that his grandfather, Reza Shah, inherited a ruin and built a modern Iran. So the idea is that if the country is destroyed first, RP2 can do the same thing.
That's an astonishingly cynical view.
To say the least. It tells people that reconstruction requires destruction first.
So with all that as a backdrop, the quote from Donald Trump about a potential meeting becomes really crucial.
It does. It's the definitive blow from the outside. Trump says RP seems like a good guy, but then he adds, and this is the key part, I am not necessarily sure that doing such a thing is appropriate.
He's talking about a formal meeting.
Yeah.
An endorsement.
Exactly. And then he says, I think we should let everyone come to the field and see who emerges.
That's a huge statement. It's a direct rejection of the idea that Washington gets to anoint the next leader.
It's a dual rejection. He denies the meeting, and he affirms that the future has to be decided by the people in Iran, in the field.
And you can see why this message resonates. The sources connect this back to historical grievances against the Pahlavi dynasty.
They do, reminding the listener about Reza Shah confiscating land, or how 50% of the oil revenue under his son went to the royal family. That history creates a deep, deep distrust.
Which you then see reflected in the slogans on the street today.
Absolutely. You hear death to the dictator, of course. But you also hear very specific rejections like Azerbaijan is honorable, Pahlavi is dishonorable. They are actively rejecting both options.
So let's pull all this together. What we're seeing in GM 1404 is a movement that is radicalized, organized, and already scoring tactical wins.
Yes, the source mentioned that incident in Mashhad where protesters actually disarmed and detained a bus full of regime forces. That shows real operational capacity.
The situation sounds incredibly volatile.
One journalist called it hockey on ice. Things can change in an instant. The regime is backed into a corner. It seems they have only two choices left. Bring out the tanks and use massive military force, or concede.
The road for gradual reform is closed.
It's closed because the people are in room 3. They've already decided that road leads nowhere.
It really feels like a moment of maximum risk, but also maximum opportunity. You have this incredible domestic determination against a weak, fractured regime.
And what's so fascinating is how the sources all come back to this one idea. True change only happens in the streets. Kafi Kiabun. So for you, the final thought is this. Given that level of determination, that willingness to face violence, what historical precedent is there for a movement this radical to be stopped by media campaigns or external political games?
The movement seems to have a life of its own at this point.
They've already decided what they're willing to pay. History suggests that when a people reaches that point, they're the ones who define the future, regardless of all the noise happening on the sidelines.